Welcome back to the Abundant Practice Podcast. I'm your host, Allison Pereer, and I'm here with Julia Colangelo. And Julia and I have a long and storied history. She was in one of my practice building groups and built her practice beautifully, and then shifted over to coaching and helps people with flow. So then she became my coach. I got to go out to Hawaii and learn from her and be with her and work with her in a number of capacities. And so Julia has been both a student and a mentor of mine, and was somebody that I reached out to a good bit after Helene, because as you will hear, Julia has been through hell with her own natural disaster. But thank you for being here, Julia. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. And I think this is such an important topic to discuss as practice owners and as clinicians and as disaster survivors.
Yeah, yeah. So can you do a like description of what happened in your disaster?
Yeah. So over 18 months ago, it felt like before that I had some other issues that were just lingering from some chronic health stuff that became more acute. But we survived the Maui wildfires, specifically in Lahaina. There were three wildfires that day: Olinda, Kula, and Lahaina. Lahaina was the largest one, and the fires were caused by, the neglect of the electrical in the whole town. And because of that and wind, this fire took out the entire town and neighborhoods surrounding Lahaina town specifically. And so overnight, I went from, small business owner with a successful, steady business to losing almost all of my IP on electrical devices and
Mhm.
you know, uh, different hard drives that I had and podcast equipment, everything, losing everything in an instant, very abruptly and unexpectedly, with no real preparation time, and needing to have this short term, I would say midterm, and then now I would say I'm just entering the longer term recovery of what it looks like to try to build something differently after
Mhm.
needing to face very abrupt, unexpected, trauma, danger, and loss.
Yeah. And it wasn't just your business affected. You lost your home, you
Oh,
lost your car,
yes, we
you and
lost
your
our
two
home.
kids
We
and your
lost
partner
the
fled in a
schools.
car.
We fled in a car. We made it out. The New York Times stamp said that we were 2 minutes away from it. It was already, the fire was on our street, but the wind was blowing down our street another direction. And
Mhm.
so, but it was on our street, and it took us 4 hours to flee what would have taken, about 30 minutes to get to safety. And there were moments, I actually saw our home in flames from a
Mm.
rooftop in the neighborhood, but I still thought in what we do throughout trauma, oh, I'll just come back tomorrow. This can't be real.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was with, they were 1 and 4 at that, not even one, 11 months old and 4 years old at the time, our daughters.
Yeah.
And of course, I was the parent who promised and reassured that nothing would happen. So one of the long-term things is, building back the trust of thinking everything's going to be okay. And then not because of what I did or didn't do, things are still not okay.
Mhm.
And that's something that I just never expected to have to deal with children at such a young age, and
Yeah.
with owning a business and not having any real playbook for how much and how severely this would impact my ability to run a business.
Mhm. Yeah. I'm in the, I guess, late early or early mid stage. So, oh, I'm going to cry because that's what you do in the stage.
I know.
Um,
This can be
um,
part one
yeah.
of us feeling our feelings,
Yeah. And
which
we're
is
5 months
important.
out. 5 months in 2 days of when we're recording this, we're 5 months out from Helene. And the destruction's still everywhere, it's driving past the destruction every day has been kind of exposure therapy over time. I'm like, oh yeah, There's a shell of those buildings and the buildings that are completely gone and that kind of thing. But everybody I know lost someone, lost a job, or lost a business they owned. I mean, like everybody knows somebody, I should say.
Of course.
So it's this ongoing, interesting trauma that as a business owner and as somebody whose house had, we've got tens of thousands of dollars of damage, but it's like nothing compared to other
Of course.
people. Um, there's the survivor's guilt.
I was going to say you have that added layer where it was
Yeah.
almost it wasn't easier, but it was to know that it was a complete loss was gave gave the closure and shortened my sentences, which
Hmm.
when
Hmm.
I was communicating, I could just say, "Yep, we lost it all." You know, it wasn't, well, we lost this, but not that, but this, not that. It was we got out with one of the cars and the beach umbrellas that were in the car, by
Yeah.
chance.
Clothes on your back.
Yes, clothes on the
Yeah.
back.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I reached out to you to do this podcast when the LA fires were still raging.
Yeah,
And probably by the time this airs, it will be another disaster somewhere.
of course.
So I think it's good for therapists to hear, like, you're not alone. I reached
Mhm.
out to some Katrina therapists too
Mhm.
back when I was like, I don't even know how do I sit with people when I
Yeah,
can barely talk about it without crying, you know?
yeah. And I had to make the decision to stop sitting with people.
Yeah.
Or in some ways, it felt like the decision was made for me. That it was it was shocking as someone who has learned from you for many, many years. You've instilled this, vision of an ideal client, of having a niche, a focus. And I've done that successfully in multiple businesses and through different programs and approaches and roadmaps. And to still have the cold shoulder happen from a few clients, the week of the fires, I refunded on my own accord probably $20,000 worth of retreats, deposits that were folks planning to come to Maui. Um, but then other people straight up requested a refund for other services that I was probably pretty well equipped to still deliver. And that was very dysregulating. And my confidence shrunk so much afterwards because it felt like I couldn't I had set things up as well as possible, and yet nothing could have prepared me for what the, again, short, midterm, long term, and then very long term effects would be on my sense of self as a business owner surviving a public disaster that I literally couldn't hide or escape from. And
Right.
then there were other clients who were saying things like, oh, keep the money, don't deliver the service, let's put a pin in it,
Yeah.
or here, I don't need any service. How can I support you? So I think that uh, as you've probably seen, the 5 month, 6 month to 8 month mark is when things get real. The
Yeah.
world forgets, the world moves on. You cannot move on because physically and emotionally you are impacted on a daily basis. And there isn't really a playbook that outlines what it does, again, to those of us that are public faces or the creators or the owners of the business. We're used to showing up. We're used to showing up and being real. And when the real is so unbearably painful, we have to take that step back. And that's what I had to just remove myself to self-preserve and to take care of my basic needs and my family. But you can imagine, I mean, it shrunk my business so quickly
Hmm.
that it made me question, was I, what how successful was that business ever to begin with, right? Just changed how I viewed myself. And that was one of the impacts I really didn't expect. Or to have to say the truth, which was, I'm not okay. Things are still bad
Hmm.
for such a long amount of time.
Yeah. I think that, I keep thinking about the folks in LA and let's see, that happened. I was actually right outside of LA when it started. So
Like
that
last
was
month.
January. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so like there's this sweet period after any disaster where everybody comes together and supports each other. And it
Yeah.
is like there is so much giving. There's like, I mean, that was my heart broke open, right? But that fades. People forget and the
Yeah.
cohesion fades because people have to leave when they no longer have jobs and no longer have homes. They have to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
And I know in places like where you and I live, it's certainly more expensive in Maui, but it's pretty
Yeah.
expensive to live in Asheville. So like so many
Oh, yeah.
people who lost their jobs but still had their apartment that they were renting or whatever couldn't afford it because nobody was hiring because nobody's open. So
Of
even the
course.
businesses that the buildings survived, a lot of the businesses inside of it didn't because when you don't have water for months, you can't really run your restaurant very easily.
Yeah.
Um, so we lost a lot of good businesses in addition to a lot of really beautiful places.
Mm.
Um, and so like having clients who were just fine financially, right?
Yeah.
Like it was not a problem, but they lost everything. And
Yeah.
now, so we're doing pro bono with those folks in the group practice. But when it feels very similar to COVID, but like the volume turned way up of like you're going through the
Yes.
same thing as your clients. And a lot of people unfortunately can't step away from one-on-one because it's their whole business model and they can't pay their bills without it.
Yeah.
I watched a lot of Asheville therapists be like, I'll do pro bono work with people, like week one. And I was like, you really
You can't
can't.
do that.
Like, I
You really can't
promise
do that.
you.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
what I want to like plant the seed is that you can do it down the road.
Yeah.
And this disaster recovery is so long term that now, and even 6 months ago, I was able to come back to life and say, now I can give. Now things have restabilized in some ways, finally, not in always, but
Hmm.
in some ways. But I'll never forget right after the fire going, with the kids and with Chris, we went to volunteer. It was like 3 days after. But we also needed the clothing that they were handing out, right? It was
Yeah.
and I just froze and said, this actually isn't the time that
Mhm.
for me to be the volunteer. This is in my nature. This is in my strength set that I can show up and I can help other people. And this is not the time right now. I need to focus inward and with my inner circle and with our actual community. And I need to let myself heal.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective, it meant having a lot of very hard and abrupt conversations with my team,
Hmm.
saying, this is never what I would expect. I'd have to make these decisions and changes, but I have to. And although I think it's noble to say, I'll pay them before me or I'll do this, when you're in a disaster recovery phase, that's not how it works. That's not practical. You literally can't get by. We couldn't pay our bills if we
Hmm.
weren't carving out some of any revenue for ourselves.
Hmm.
I think I don't know if you had this experience, but with the LA fires, I had this aha moment where it pained me so much because for over a year at that point, I had thought, is this just because we're on an isolated island
Hmm.
in a neighborhood that had 17 firemen and women fighting this? If this had happened in California, this never would have happened. And
Huh.
to see it happen and happen worse, I was so shocked because this fantasy that my mind had created of if only I had chosen somewhere else with more resources available on the mainland, it would have been easier or different. But it also seeing the pain and the just tragedy reminded me that I also actually had recovered and healed more than I gave myself credit because I was jarred, I was distraught, I was disoriented, but I was also able to function, able to be in my business. I was able to instill hope in friends and clients who lost everything and say, it is going to be really painful for at least a year. It will be great for about 6 weeks. It will be really tough as things set in from the 3 to 6 and 9 month mark. And you cannot drive away or avoid seeing the visuals of destruction. And then now at the year and a half mark, there's gravel instead of the remnants of destruction. And honestly, I can speak from that place of every time we drive to Lahaina twice a week for our for baseball, we coach t-ball, and there's hope every week, every 2 days, every few days we are there. There's another layer of a house built up. There's another uh, gravel lot that now has foundation laid. But it is a year and a half. And that's a long time to think about when you're a business owner, when you are someone in the helping profession, when you are of service to others, that it took seeing a mirror example to say, wow, I see the way forward. I wish I had known this. And now I get to be of service. Like I've been on so many consultation calls being able to say, wish I would have done this, should have done that, was too proud at the time to do this. I think having been successful, I was too proud to ask for help. We never made a GoFundMe. We never made any of these things that probably we should have, but I was just so used to having steady recurring income based on my skill set and business model.
Mhm.
Even though at that point it had been already half not service oriented, more product based, it was just, I wasn't prepared for the amount of money we would be spending to help ourselves, our community, and others so abruptly.
Mhm.
And it's sort of like I would tell people when they were spending money on their wedding, I'm like, it's going to feel like a lot. And then everything sort of levels out a year later. I remember telling that and talking about that with clients in therapy. Like there
Mhm.
would just be this financial stress. It's similar to that in that it will eventually level out, but a disaster just derails things for much longer.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think about like I did not want to work. Like I was traumatized, right?
Totally traumatized. Absolutely.
Um, I wanted to do manual labor. That's all I wanted to do. And that's what I did. I did a lot of hauling stuff and it felt so good. And I would bring my kids to the distribution centers, and my little 8-year-old would be handing me these 25-pound waters, like as in the fireman chain or whatever to move things. But I needed, like, moving my body helped so much. And we didn't have communication for a few days after it happened. So it's like we didn't know if anybody knew, which was even scarier because there was no way in or out for a few days. Um, and as you started to see like the destruction, because it took us 2 days just to get off our street, because there were about
Mm.
100 trees that came down in on our street, which only has like 30 houses. Um, that like my identity as a business owner was so divorced from my experience. Like I couldn't think about it. And I had the staff who's all my administrative staff is Asheville based. And so I had this staff who, for a while, I couldn't get in touch with. And then, everybody deals with disaster differently.
Yeah.
And normally in the past, I would say I'd been like, okay, well, let's just get going. Like, what's the next step? What do we do in this business to get it back? But I couldn't.
Yeah.
Um, I just, yeah, I
Yeah.
saw
The
too
motivation
much.
and discipline,
It's gone.
because you don't even know what day of the week it is.
Right.
You don't even know what's happening. And that's actually, I don't know if you feel this long term now with what all of the other world events, it's hard to be
Mhm.
in touch with it all when we're still in the middle of the current our disaster recovery and the
Yeah.
trauma of that. And so
Yeah.
it's my motivation went completely, I mean, it just disappeared.
Hmm.
Um, and then I reminded myself that having anything that activated a flow state, manual labor is a great thing,
Hmm.
a craft or something for me and you work related was an aid, and it just had to be different. And
Yeah.
so I really look at, they talk about before the fire and after the fire, before the disaster, after the
Hmm.
disaster. And I look at my business very as like literally two different built experiences and
Hmm.
pathways
Yeah.
because I had to do things radically different. And it's not that I'm building everything in a way that's just in case it all burns down again,
Hmm.
but I am doing it in a more disciplined way where I'm aware of what could potentially derail things and how tender I have to be with myself.
Hmm.
And it's made me a better teacher and coach, probably because I'm really tuned into how many variables and
Yeah.
how abruptly they could disrupt or change someone's experience in day to day life, even.
Yeah. It's interesting because when our storm happened, I thought of you immediately because you had been fairly open about your experience.
Yeah.
And I remember when everything burned down, I was like, God, poor Julia. Like,
Yeah.
here's some cash on Venmo. Like, it was like I
Yes.
did not get it. Like I didn't get it at all. I felt awful for you, but
Oh,
I
no,
didn't
but
get
that
it.
helped. That made the difference. It was the asking. I don't know if you
Hmm.
felt this. I could not ask. I could
Oh
not
no.
ask. Someone said to me straight up, "What's your Venmo?" I didn't even think to ask why because
Mhm.
I don't even know if I had a Venmo. I'm
Right.
elder millennial. Um, but I sent it and then she started posting it. And then other
Hmm.
people started posting it and sharing it. And then I was like, oh, this is what's happening. We're spending, like, I'm refunding massive amounts of money. We're spending, I think we spent like $25,000 in 2 weeks because we didn't
Yeah.
have slippers, we didn't have shoes, we didn't have underwear or like anything. We had to buy plane tickets because we couldn't find housing. We were staying with strangers who opened their door. Right, it was so chaotic that I was like, oh, cash direct to the people is actually super helpful. I was
So
still too proud
helpful.
to do a GoFundMe. If
Hmm.
you are surviving a disaster, please make one. Please
Just
just
do one.
allow
If your
immediate
friends
help
survive, do one for them. Just
all
do
the
one for
time.
them.
Exactly.
Oh God, we're
And
bad at time.
yeah, so
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and know that it does, you will build something, it will just be different.
Yeah.
That's my main takeaway. You will build a different community. It will be different and there will be grief and layers in it, but you'll be able to build something. It will just not, I think I had to remove the rebuilding because and now I'm like I'm revitalizing my life with these different builds in my
Yeah.
business, in our community, in our friendship groups. It's just like revitalizing it, because that it unfortunately what was lost is lost.
Yeah.
And I had to have that radical acceptance and that practice within myself.
Yeah.
Allison, thank you for inviting me on.
Yeah, I feel like we could talk about this for hours. I feel like
We
there's so much
could.
that I didn't know until I went through it that could be helpful for other people. But I guess just for anybody surviving a disaster right now or who has survived one, like we get it.
We get it, and reach out. Allison and I get it.
Yeah.
Message us. We're open books. And the resources that we can share that we wish we would have done
Hmm.
differently or instead are available to you. It's not too
Absolutely.
late.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks
you
for
so much,
having me.
Julia. Bye.